Welcome to Welcome to the World Economic Forum in Geneva, Switzerland. This is Building a Cohesive World, the latest in our Great Reset Dialogue series. In the next hour, we're going to be hearing from some of the people who are developing and delivering the vaccines that will transform 2021. Hi, we're joined today by Sebastian Kurz, the Federal Chancellor of Austria, by Henrietta Fore, who's Executive Director of UNICEF, the UN agency that's charged with procuring and supplying COVID-19 vaccines to some of the toughest and hardest to reach places in the world. We're joined by Stefan Bancel, CEO of Moderna in the US, which this week applied for regulatory approval for its vaccine in the US and in Europe. By Semene Pangalos, Executive Vice President of Biopharmaceutical Research and Development with AstraZeneca in the UK, who've just released results for their vaccine, and Paul Stoffels, who's Chief Scientific Officer at Johnson & Johnson in the US, which is also working on a candidate vaccine for COVID-19. But first, I'd like to hand over to the chair of today's call, President of the World Economic Forum, Birger Brender. Birger.
Thank you so much, Adrian, and welcome to all the participants. But we have also a special welcome then to a great panel. And we are in a situation now where we are definitely seeing some light in the end of the tunnel with the vaccination, but we are still in a health crisis here in Europe, North America, but still also in South Asia. We know that every emphasis now has to be also on a sustainable recovery, but then we have to start investing for the future, for the green recovery, and also towards digital investments that are necessary. Let me first start and welcome the Bundeskanzler, the Federal Chancellor of Austria, Sebastian Kurz. It's great to have you here. You've been Bundeskanzler for some years, but you also have been Foreign Minister, very experienced. I guess this is one of also the most complex crisis you've been faced with. So welcome, Sebastian, and I give the floor for you for some opening remarks, and then I'll have a couple of questions. Bundeskanzler.
Thank you very much, Birger, for inviting me, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very glad to be together with you today, even so it is only remote, but it is much better than nothing. As you can imagine, 2020 is a very challenging year for all of us. Like most of Europe, we in Austria are currently fighting against the second wave. We are in the final week of our second lockdown. Over the last 3 weeks, we managed it to reduce our infection rate by half, but we have still a long way to go. We have a strategy of a soft lockdown until the new year, and we try to combine it with a strategy for mass corona tests for the whole population and, of course, preparations for corona vaccinations next year. I hope that there is light on the horizon for 2021, but in our case, we think that we still have another 4 to 5 difficult months ahead of us, especially also because of the fact that Austria is quite dependent on tourism. I think there are some areas where we have learned a lot during the last few months. There are some lessons we were able to learn in this corona pandemic. And I would say the first is definitely the value of digitalization. We see how more digitally enabled nations are better able to deal with the crisis than others. And especially in Europe, I believe we see that our old way of doing themes is not always the most effective one. The second lesson for us is the importance of crisis preparedness. We see that our model in Austria, but I think also in the rest of Europe, in Western democracies, where we tend to take stability and peace for granted, is still vulnerable to crisis. And I think we need to take Corona as a warning to prepare for other scenarios, such as cyber attacks or blackouts. And the third point, I think the relevance of budgetary discipline should not be over. It is totally understandable, in my view, that we support in the European Union those countries that have been hit hardest by the Corona pandemic. But I think that our European Recovery Fund must not be an excuse for just more government spending and less budgetary discipline. These are just three areas and some thoughts where I think that we should learn from this crisis and don't take steps in the wrong direction. Thank you once again for inviting me and looking forward to discuss some of these issues with you.
Well, thank you so much, Federal Chancellor. Thank you for those opening remarks. President-elect Joe Biden has used this term, building back better. And if you look at Austria and Europe now, of course, there is this fund of 750 billion euros to then consumption, but also for investments. How do you feel and how do you think and how are you planning to build back securing growth in your own country? And do you think Europe is on the right track with the stimulus and what is needed also of structural changes for Europe moving forward? Or are we just using it on short-term consumption and keeping jobs that maybe are not there when the Kurzarbeit or chômage technique or furloughing is over in 6-7 months?
Well, first of all, I want to say that at the beginning we were quite skeptical about this 750 billion euro fund because it's a lot of money. It's extremely costly for net payer countries like us in the EU. But in the end, we supported it because we see the need of it, but we think that it has to be invested in the right way. So I would say it is important that we invested in digitalization, that we invested in sustainability, but that we should be careful not to just support the structures as we have it. In our case, we are very export orientated, and of course, as long as the whole world is suffering, it is difficult for an export-oriented country like us. We are happy that industries, also car industries, automotive, is going much better now than we expected it a few months ago. In our case, our main problem is that nearly 15% of our GDP is based on tourism, and for tourism, it's terrible, and it's not possible to solve the situation with money. So I would say I'm happy that in industries it's going better than expected. On tourism, it will stay extremely negative the whole next months and probably the whole year 2021. And then in the EU, I hope that especially in those countries where there is a need of getting billions of euros from this fund, it is combined with necessary reforms and structural reforms and not only deficit spending.
No, thank you. I was also wondering, inside the EU now, there is some division on unlocking these funds. We know there is discussions both with Poland and Hungary. How do you see the EU moving forward? Is this something that is happening all the time, so you shouldn't exaggerate it? Or are you concerned that when Europe needs to know also assert itself globally, we see that China is going to grow with 4% this year. We know also recovery is coming back in the US. The role of EU here, are you kind of optimistic on medium term for the EU?
Well, to be honest, I think the realistic scenario is that we have much more economic growth in China and the US and less in Europe. So I can't say that I'm extremely optimistic. But I think that the current debate about the budget, the MFF, the question of rule of law, that this is not the main reason. And I'm not afraid of this debate, because I think it was predictable that we will have this debate. Everybody knew it, that it is going to come. We had it several times in the past. We are not happy about this debate, but it's not the first time. And I think it's probably another fact that makes a negative image for the decision-making processes in the EU, but I think it's not the most relevant question it's not the most relevant for the question, will there be a lot of economic growth or not? So I think the debate with Hungary and Poland is difficult. I think in the end there will be a compromise. I hope so, but I think that there's too much focus on these debates in the EU and less focus on the question of digitalization, how to spend this money correctly, structural reforms, competitiveness. Since UK left the EU, we have even less debates about competitiveness than we had it before, and I think this is a point that makes that is a reason why I'm not so optimistic, unfortunately.
I know it's a tough one to raise, but on the Brexit, since you mentioned it, and the UK, we know there are tough negotiations now between Barnier and the UK. Do you think there's going to be a solution?
Yes, I think so, and I hope that there will be a solution. But I'm still extremely unhappy that the UK left the EU, because in my days as foreign minister, in many debates I had the impression that the UK was one of the few countries focusing on competitiveness. UK was always one of the few countries bringing on the table a wider perspective than only the EU, with a more global focus on the US, on China, on other parts of the world. And my impression is that besides the fact that the EU is now smaller and that we don't have the same power militarily, besides all these facts, the main problem with the UK leaving the EU is that we lose their way of thinking on the table. And I think this is problematic because all these debates about rule of law, all these debates about a social union, these are all necessary. But I think we are losing the perspective of the global perspective of UK, and that's what will hurt us the most on the long run.
Well, thank you. And at the same time, the EU has now to maneuver between the G2, US and China. Have you already congratulated President-elect Joe Biden?
Yes, we did, and we hope that there's a chance to have stronger ties again between the US and the EU. We hope that all the debates about free trade will now be able to solve easily. And of course, as a small country, we are pretty much committed to multilateralism. And I think also there it is good if we have a strong cooperation with the US. And I see this is a chance for a closer relationship again.
Bundeskanzler, as you can see, there are also 3 CEOs from leading pharmaceutical companies that we're going to have a dialogue with later on, and also Henrietta Fore, as you can say, here from UNICEF. But on vaccination and the end of the light in the end of the tunnel, how do you see now the pandemic? I thought you said not out of the woods in 4 or 5 months. It's going to take time. I guess you are part of the EU mobilization on the vaccination, but maybe 2 words from your side also on the pandemic and the importance of vaccination.
Well, I'm happy, Borg, to have the opportunity to listen to the CEOs and to learn probably more about how the next few months will be for us. Of course, for us, vaccination is the game changer, and it's difficult to plan the next year. But our perspective is that we hopefully have the chance to vaccinate our risk groups in the first quarter. And have the chance to vaccinate broader parts of society in the second quarter. And if this is possible, we are more than thankful and happy because the worst part of the crisis was the time where we had no perspective and nobody knew will it be a crisis of weeks, months, years, or even longer. And so I think we are now in a much better situation, so I'm happy to listen and probably learn a bit more about what the next few months will bring.
Last question to you, Sebastian. I guess we all have learned from this crisis, this pandemic. It has been a crisis management, but with all your responsibilities, if you look back at the last 3 quarters of a year, what are the main lessons you have learned for the future and that you always will take with you, also as the leader of Austria in the years to come?
Well, I would say there are 3 lessons. The first is we managed it to had a budget surplus during the last years. And there was always a big debate in Austria if it's necessary or not. I was always extremely proud that we managed it. And with the crisis, the answer was clear. It was necessary because we needed now billions of euros to support our businesses. So I think having the budget under control in normal days of economic growth is extremely important to be prepared. The second point is I think we have to find a way to be faster in decision making in our democracies in Europe. It's not that I would like to copy the Chinese model, and I'm very happy to live in Europe with all our with all our rights, with all our freedoms, with our democracy, with rule of law. But I sometimes had the impression that we are not as fast in reaction on crisis as other parts of the world are. And the third point, and that's probably the most important, I think we have to get much better on digitalization. No matter if you look at contact tracing in finding the pandemic, if you look at online shopping, or if you look at homeschooling, a lack of digital infrastructure, a lack of digital skills is terrible in normal days, but especially in a crisis.
Thank you so much. Vielen Dank, Herr Bundeskanzler. Thank you, Sebastian. This was very, very interesting, and thank you for joining us again. We have thousands of people listening, and a lot of our CEOs also. So, Adrian, I leave it now to you. We have a great panel.
Thank you very much, Birger. And I want to start by turning to someone whose agency is responsible really for distributing the vaccines to an incredible number of the world's population. That's Henrietta Fore. Henrietta, thanks for joining us. Can you give us a sense of both the scale of the challenge that UNICEF has taken on and also some of the kind of milestones on the road to delivering on that challenge?
Thank you very much. It is a challenge, all right. So currently, UNICEF procures and delivers about 2 billion vaccine doses a year. And that is to cover primarily childhood diseases, of which there are many, and they are preventable, and vaccines work, and we know this is important. What COVAX has done is it is now asking us to double that number for next year. And it's to the lowest and the middle low income countries. So it's the hardest places that you mentioned earlier. So the challenge is enormous. It's got to be a big public-private partnership. So we need every company that is involved in a number of sectors. So let me just tick through them because we could really use help. Countries are going to need help on their supply chains and on their cold chains. Currently, we are used to vaccines that can move in relatively cool temperatures, but not ultra cold. But we need supply chain, logistics, and transportation sectors that are all working together. We need to prioritize the transportation of vaccines so that in the lessened amount of cargo space that we can get the vaccines out there and across the boundaries and into the countries. And we need to make sure that we are getting help from the countries about whatever logistical bottlenecks there is in a country, you know, getting it through an airport, getting the approval for the vaccines to move through. Then second, we really have to think about the fragility of many of these countries' health systems. We've been just working on the Sudan recently, and these countries are very fragile. So in countries, we are going to need to help them with their actual systems. And in the poorest countries, it's particularly important. Financial support, technical support, and equal investment in the systems that will deploy COVID-19. And then third, we are going to have broad access to testing, treatments, and continue the communication on physical distancing, hand washing, wearing masks. These are all the tools that we need. We do not have hand washing facilities and a bar of soap in many parts of the world and in many hospitals and community clinics, much less homes or schools. So we've got to get this as a world. And then lastly, we've got to put a priority on the frontline workers, the healthcare workers. I'm going to put teachers in there. We've got to keep our schools open. To Sebastian's point about the importance of education and digital online learning, we just need to be sure that these frontline workers are safe. So big challenge. We could use lots of public and private help.
Henrietta, thanks for that. And just give us an idea. We've heard from the UK government just today, in fact, that they're looking at starting vaccinations of top priority health staff as early perhaps as December 21st. How long before your agency is going to be able to start distributing vaccine candidates to health workers in some of the countries you've talked about?
So, yes. So logistically, we're ready now. Part of our puzzle is that we have many agreements with existing companies who currently have vaccines that are coming through our system. So they're all ready to go. We have not done ultra cold chain anywhere other than Ebola for DRC. So that will be a challenge for us as a world for logistics. But for others, there will be many new vaccine manufacturers, many new test manufacturers. So we're quality controlling those. We're doing new agreements with many of those companies, but there are many, many companies that are now interested in this field. So it's opening up. So we're ready now is the answer. But there's one other factor in this, which is that we've got to be sure that we are getting the word out that people need to take the vaccines, that vaccines are safe, There's a lot of vaccine hesitancy, and we've got to overcome that if we're going to actually protect the world.
Henrietta, thank you. And stay with us, because I know you'll want to hear from our CEOs and executives on the progress they're making in terms of delivering vaccines. And I want to turn, if I can, to Semeni Pangalos of AstraZeneca. Semeni, you've been involved, obviously, in the vaccine candidate in development with Oxford University. Can you give us a clue as to how that vaccine development's progressing, what the next steps are for you? Because I think one of the things that will appeal to Henrietta and UNICEF is that your vaccine, I think, is one of the ones that is perhaps less challenging for those supply chains. It's easier to distribute.
Yeah, and I actually want to just call out and thank Henrietta for all her support and for the support from COVAX. As you rightly say, our vaccine is somewhat easier to distribute around the world because it's a traditional refrigerated vaccine. And we have, as part of our commitment to helping deal with the pandemic, committed to doing and delivering and supplying the vaccine during the pandemic at not-for-profit. And we have around 3 billion doses ready to go by the end of 2021. Many of those, several hundred million of those doses available in the first quarter of next year. And that doesn't include in those hundreds of millions the supply from Serum Institute of India and our farmers. So I do think with the data we have a vaccine that is approvable, that will make a dent in the pandemic, along with the vaccines from Pfizer and Moderna. And I think the supply as early in the year as possible around the world is going to be very important to try and make the dent that we need on this virus and getting us all back to a semblance of normality.
What have you learned from the trials that you've undertaken? Because it's a complicated logistical process, getting people to actually take 2 vaccines within a set amount of time. You know, that requires people who are going to take the vaccine to be disciplined. It requires the distribution to be disciplined. What have been the things that you've learned in the process of doing these trials?
Well, they are complicated, and I think the point around vaccine hesitancy that I'm sure we'll talk about is incredibly important. And of course, different countries and regions have different levels of vaccine hesitancy, and we need to make sure again that it's not enough to have the wealthy countries vaccinated. We have to have the world vaccinated, and so we need enough supply around the world. Now, you know, the good news again with our vaccine, it looks like, you know, the interdose interval for us is something that doesn't impact the efficacy. So I think in that regard, we'll be in good shape. Ultimately, you know, the first step for us is to get the vaccine approved in as many countries as possible, and then to work with groups such as COVAX and CEPI, WHO, as well as you know, all the countries around the world that have shown an interest in our vaccine, to get it made available as quickly as possible to as many people as possible.
Yeah. And besides the vaccine itself, you've also got an antibody program that you're developing. Can you just explain a little bit more about how that works?
Yeah, so I mean, I think just to take a step back, the vaccine was the last foray we made into trying to tackle this virus. The first was repositioning some of our, well, first actually was trying to make sure that none of our supply of our existing medicines was impacted by the pandemic. So testing our employees, and actually as a consequence of that, creating and becoming part of the UK diagnostic machinery to help the UK test its population was the first thing that we did. Then we had repositioning molecules in our existing pipeline to see whether we could actually make a dent into the disease that way. Then we initiated our monoclonal antibody program in parallel. It's a very interesting antibody. It's a cocktail of 2 very potent monoclonal antibodies that have got half-life extension technology, which means that we think we will have protection with this therapy in the prophylactic setting for probably around, I would say, 9 to 12 months, based on the PK data we have so far from our initial human studies. And so this is incredibly important because, as we know, not everyone is going to respond to a vaccine. Some people are immune suppressed, cancer patients, people with autoimmune disease, people on dialysis. And so having therapies in addition to vaccines, I think, is going to be very important for those some of those vulnerable populations. So that started we have 5 phase 3 programs have started or about to start. And again, we hope to generate data on the long-acting antibodies in the first quarter and first half of next year, with, again, quite a bit of supply, millions of doses versus billions of doses, though. So it's a different order of magnitude in terms of the supply, but still very important for us.
Extraordinary. Mene, stay with us. I want to turn to Stefan Bancel from Moderna. And Stefan, you've had some extraordinary news this week on your vaccine. How, just recalling actually speaking to you back in March on this call, right at the beginning of the journey, you know, what an incredible 9 months it's been in terms of you getting this vaccine to a position where you're now going to be able to take it to health workers and start the process of tackling this pandemic head on. Can you just tell us a little bit about that journey and where you're at right now?
Yes, so actually, you know, we started, like many of my colleagues, racing this virus early in January. We thought initially it was an outbreak. And it's actually at Davos, talking to Richard Hatchett and Jeremy Farrar several times per day, that looking at a lot of data, I say, oh shit, it's a pandemic. I only read about those, you know, in history, biology books. And so we doubled down, a lot of collaboration with the US government first. You know, Dr. Tony Fauci and our team have been working together for several years and getting this into the clinic quickly in March, then the phase 2, because we wanted to make sure we did the phase 1, a phase 2, and a phase 3, you know, the whole 9 yards. Starting a phase 3 in July. We had never run a phase 3 at Moderna, so that was our first one. I'm sure a lot of people thought we would not be able to pull it off. The team did a remarkable job where we got 30,000 people vaccinated between July 27 and October 22nd. We are very proud of the diversity. Actually, one of the hardest decisions I had to make this year is to ask the team to slow down the recruitment of a phase 3 because we didn't have enough African Americans, didn't have enough Latino, Latinx in the study. And the study we ended up having as a wonderful representation of, you know, different ethnic groups. 25% are elderly, as of course it's very important to know the protection of the elderly. A lot of people with diabetes, you know, heart disease, lung disease, a lot of healthcare workers, a lot of frontline workers. So we feel very good that the study is a good representation. And indeed, you know, 2 weeks ago, we had the first interim data cut that was very exciting. But on Monday this week, we shared our final analysis. So the vaccine has shown a 94.1% efficacy to prevention of disease, meaning 94% of people that get the vaccine don't get disease symptom, which of course is wonderful. But the piece I got the most excited on Sunday when I got the data from my team was the severe cases. We had 30 cases of severe disease, and all 30 were on placebo. We had 0 on the vaccine, meaning that, you know, if you get the vaccine, most probably you will have no disease symptom given the high efficacy. But most probably, if you have any sign of disease, it will be very mild disease. And as we know, what has really had a big impact on human life, public health, and the economy is the horrible cascade of severe disease, hospitalization, ICU, and death, which has driven to all the lockdowns, wearing masks, and all the social distancing, and all the suffering and the mental suffering that we know and that is going on as we speak. So that's where we are. On Monday, we filed at the same time in the US for an approval in Europe to the WHO, which is of course very important to help around the world, but also in the UK, you know, Switzerland, Israel, Canada, and a few more countries. The US has set up a date of December 17 for FDA advisory committee to review our vaccine. Europe has announced on Tuesday morning for a press release that they've set up January 12 at the latest to have the committee to review our vaccine as well. We'll see with the UK if they go a bit faster. Clearly today was great news for the world that the UK approved the Pfizer vaccine. It can start protecting healthcare workers and the elderly. Really wonderful news. And so we are on track to have 20 million doses ready before the end of the year. So we're already several millions ready in the fridge to go. As soon as we're going to get the go-ahead, we should be able to start vaccinating within 24 hours. That's a collaboration we've had with Operation Warp Speed in the US. General Perna, you know, is a 4-star, you know, supply chain general in the US military and has worked really hard with his team to get ready. He's literally ready to pull the trucks back into the dock and start loading the products when he gets the green light. The big challenge, of course, is going to be scaling up manufacturing. Moderna is still a 1,000-people company. People tend to forget that. We don't have presence all around the world. We're setting up pharmacovigilance, which is very important to track potential side effects and people reporting side effects. It's, of course, a legal obligation that is very important. Supply chain is important too. What I'm really happy is, we invested a lot in process development. If you look at the 2 mRNA vaccines, our vaccine is stored at -20 Celsius, not -70, which is much easier because there are already some products at -20. So a lot of distribution capabilities around the world have -20 capabilities. And then the good news we had 2 weeks ago is we have stability data showing that we can keep the vaccine for 30 days at 2 to 8 Celsius in a regular fridge, like a traditional vaccine. And so the way we think is going to work is not going to be ideal. Our regular product are lyophilized, so they're all 2 to 8 Celsius in a vial. But because of the pandemic, we knew we needed to go with liquid form of vaccine because lyo capacity was going to be an issue, not enough lyo capacity in the world, and also yield. If you lose, 5 to 10% of your mass of vaccine because of a manufacturing step, it's much less people you can vaccinate. And so we feel that this supply chain works well. Again, in the case of a pandemic, it's not ideal, but we think it works well. You can ship to big distribution centers at -20, and that capability exists. And then you can ship to pharmacies, hospital, remote places at 2 to 8 Celsius, which, as Henrietta said, is done for our vaccine, is done for products like insulin, which are widely distributed around the world. So that's where we are. We're on track for having 500 million to 1 billion doses next year. And the team is working as hard as they can, 24/7, literally, to get as many products as we can out of the door. We know that lives, depends on it. We're still losing, around 10,000 people a day around the world. I'm sure many more that are not reported, both direct and indirect cause of death. And so we have to work together. The piece I'm the most happy about what I witnessed this year is first incredible collaboration, public-private partnership between governments, academics, across industry. The FDA and the regulatory agencies have been exemplary. It used to take 30 days to get a meeting scheduled with the FDA. Some days we had 3 meetings in a single day just to get moving to problem solve together. The US government has been very helpful. We got $1 billion for funding the clinical trial. So basically the US government, if you think about it, has offered to the world the cost of developing Moderna's vaccine, which is going to help a lot, of course, in terms of affordability and access around the world, because the US basically picked up the tab to pay for the development of a product.
Stefan, it's fascinating to hear you talk about the way that Moderna's kind of vaccine program has developed, and also with so few people involved. You think about those 1,000 staff working 24/7 to do this. It's a phenomenal achievement. But I think the next step that people are wondering about is this mass distribution. The world's probably never seen anything like the scale of vaccination that we're going to see in 2021. What can you tell us? I know your part of the bargain is the creation of the vaccine, if you like, and the delivery of it to the people who distribute it. But what can you tell us about the challenge that the people actually doing the vaccinations are going to face, having been part of this whole program?
Yeah, the first piece I think is going to be extremely frustrating for the general population, that how slow it's going to feel between people reading the headlines those days that there's great news on the vaccine front. And that's another achievement of the industry that I think we should not forget. The fastest vaccine before, I think, was 4 years, which is already a great time versus most vaccine, 7, 8, 10 years of development. Again, going back to this incredible collaboration. But I think it's going to be frustrating because there won't be enough for most people in the world, definitely in the first quarter, definitely in the second quarter, and most probably for the entire year. If you think about Henrietta, worrying about people around the world, not only in rich countries. In rich countries, not only people have cash, but also they have less people. And so it's a math problem of just a number of people that you need to vaccinate. And so I think around the world is going to be very frustrating that people will want to get vaccine. I know we talk a lot about all the people who claim they don't want a vaccine, But I think there's going to be a lot of people wanting a vaccine very quickly to go back to normal life. And I think that people that are on the edge, when they're going to see that people who get the vaccine don't drop dead in the street, are going to realize it's better to take a vaccine and not take the risk of COVID than staying unvaccinated. I don't think we're going to solve for the classic anti-vaxxers because I don't know how to deal with illogic and not following data and science. But people that are on the fence because they are surprised, I think, by the speed at which things have moved, which has surprised all of us. If when we met in Davos in January, you will have told me, Stefan, you will have your phase 3 data of your first phase 3, 30,000 people study, at the end of November with a 94% efficacy, I would have said, yeah, this is really unlikely. Maybe it's 2% chance this happens on that time frame.
Well, thank you for just sharing that, and congratulations on the journey that you and Moderna have been on. I want to turn to Paul Stoffels from Johnson & Johnson. And Paul, Johnson & Johnson have been perhaps a little quiet in this race, but you actually have a very interesting candidate vaccine, I think, which is a single dose vaccine. Could you tell us a little bit about that and what that means and your role in the whole vaccine scenario? Because as Stefan just said, this is not going to be something that's solved tomorrow. This is going to be around for months and years to come.
Yeah, we started at the same, and thank you for inviting me. We started at a similar time frame as Stefan and the others to work on this. We took a little bit more work on getting to the single dose, and that was tested extensively first in animals and in midsummer into the phase 1 humans studies, and we could prove that that was viable. We had already worked on in RSV and in Zika with a single dose where we could show that that was viable. And so that's what we took on in phase 3, and that started mid-September. We are mid-stage almost, but helped by the pandemic, we target at finishing our phase 3 in January, and that would yield in the first quarter definitely an outcome. In parallel, we have been upscaling very hard. So we are focusing on bringing 1 billion vaccines next year. And 1 billion vaccines would mean 1 billion people with a single dose. 1 billion people could be vaccinated with that. And that is hopefully we can contribute significantly in the course of next year to that. In addition to that, we worked on it for many years, and also the stability. We have a 2 to 8 Celsius stability for at least 3 months at this moment for the vaccine, but going forward might be up to a year, and that will help a lot. Of course, what Henrietta was talking about, distribution in the low and middle income countries where less infrastructure is available. So we also committed from the beginning, we have now committed a 500 million allocation to the low income countries to make sure that very early on, especially also healthcare workers and high risk people can be vaccinated around the world and not just in the West. So contributing big time, and hopefully we will get there in the first quarter of next year.
Thanks, Paul. I mean, Stefan spoke about the collaboration between government, business, academics that's gone into this whole vaccine race. And we talk about it perhaps sometimes as a race, but it is in fact an incredible collaboration. Do you see some of that collaborative kind of architecture staying in place for future developments, for future treatments for people on perhaps other diseases and other issues?
Yeah, we learned to collaborate already with the larger pharmaceutical industry. We have been working on dementia. We have been working on biomarkers in cancer in different space. But it's just like, say, on a voluntary basis, people join, people don't join. Also, the interface with the European research as well as with US research accelerated a lot of scientific programs already. But that trained us, let's say, we got some training in how to work together. Now it has been really accelerated. And what Stefan was saying on our interfaces with the regulators between all of the industry partners as well as with the clinical trial centers, the collaboration has been exceptional. 24/7 feedback from regulators within hours instead of days, and the trust which has been built between all of the partners that we are all in to combat this pandemic. It's not against each other. It's a race against the disease. It's a race to save the world from more suffering from the pandemic. And that has been this exceptional experience for all of us. And I'm pretty sure that this will carry over to research in dementia, research in mental health, research in areas which are much more difficult for new products, and hopefully we can bring that to fruition going forward.
Interesting. Thanks for that. I just want to bring Henrietta back in if I can, because hearing from Mene, from Stefan, and from Paul, it's an incredible scientific journey has gone on here. But we seem to be faced with this kind of dual challenge. On the one hand, making sure we get the vaccine to people who really want it, wherever they are in the world. And on the other, there is this huge latency of hesitancy about the vaccine itself and about informing people as to how safe it is, or as to how they might feel about taking it. And that's a big educational challenge. And how does UNICEF face that with other vaccines? Because as you said, you're in the business of vaccinating people, 2 billion people a year across an incredible scale. So how are you going to bring some of that experience to this COVID challenge?
So about 60% of our partners are local nonprofit organizations who are there before, during, and after disasters of every sort. And they have real trust in their communities. Many of these are women, and they are well known in their communities, and they convey a sense of knowledge, of experience, and information about how to keep you and your family safe. So we will rely on these community health workers. They are key in this fight against COVID. But we also have the help now of many other vehicles: television, radio, SMS, the whole social media platforms. And we've got to use these well so that there is good, credible, trustworthy information, and that people are going to trustworthy sources and not to some of the fake news that comes out. So it's a big challenge, but we are going to need to have handbills and have it on buses and on your cell phone everywhere, so people know that vaccines are available, where they can get them, that they are safe, and that they should be vaccinated.
Thanks. Mene, can I bring you back in here? Because you working with Oxford University on this, on the vaccine candidate that you have in preparation. What are you seeing as the challenges in the information sphere, in, if you like, telling people that this is something that A, is good for their health, that they should potentially take, B, that they shouldn't be unduly worried about the speed at which this has been developed, because as Stefan said, this is the fastest ever set of vaccines that we've ever seen really in human history. How do we go about helping people to understand that? And from a public health point of view, what are the messages that you think we should be conveying to people who might be skeptical as opposed to being in denial about the facts regarding vaccination?
Yes, I think first of all, I think we have to be clear as to why we've been able to move so fast. And it's not because we've cut on the quality or the safety standards of our clinical programs. It's because we've done a lot of things at risk in parallel, partly because things have been funded by governments around the world, such as the US, which has enabled us to take more risk in terms of the investments that we make, whether it be in manufacturing or in terms of embarking upon large studies, a little bit sooner than we would. But the reality is that the data we have in terms of, we'll have dosed by the time we're done probably 60,000 or more patients. And, the studies that are generating the data now are in, 20, 30, 40,000 patients from the various companies. So I think these are very significant, very extensive programs. I do think there's a very important role for experts around the world that are not affiliated to the companies to be playing in terms of educating and making the world comfortable. The quality of the data, the quality of the safety, the quality of the reactogenicity, quality of the immunogenicity data we generate is of a high standard, and that ultimately people are going to be benefiting from vaccinating. Because I think at the end of the day, everyone does want to get back to a world of normality, as Stefan said. And the only way to do that is by getting enough adoption of these vaccines that we can start to not be transmitting it from one person to the other. And when we do, that we're protected and unlikely to be becoming ill. So I think there's a big role for scientific institutions around the world in each region to be playing to educate and inform their populations about what we have and what we don't have, to make sure that all of the the false rumors and the misinformation that we see on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook are actually knocked on the head, because the sad thing and frustrating for me is how quickly some of these things become truths, even though they're not based on anything other than fiction.
Thanks. I just want to turn back to Stefan, if I may, because one of the things that Paul mentioned is just how the collaboration that's been built up over these last few months will hopefully be preserved moving forward into other areas. But one of the other points that came through in something you made was that this is really a massive public investment in a health outcome, which could realize incredible benefits in terms of saving lives. Is there a lesson here to you, Stefan, for governments about taking these kind of bold initiatives, perhaps on other issues that that are less in the news, but equally pressing, things like Alzheimer's, dementia, and some of the other kind of big challenges the world is facing potentially?
Yes, I mean, that's a very important point. And I will start first with infectious disease. We still don't have a vaccine against Zika. Zika is going to come back. I have no idea if it's next week or in 10 years, but Zika is going to come back. And I think we'll all be wiser if we have a vaccine for that. There's a lot of emerging pathogens that could, mutate and turn into outbreaks or pandemics. Our flu vaccines are still not great. And we were all worried that the next pandemic was going to be flu. So I think there's still a lot of work to do. And I think there's a lot of things that I've been reflecting a lot, and is going to make sure once we launch our vaccine to spend a lot of time with governments is how do we learn from this pandemic on the vaccine development front so that we can even go faster next time. I would argue I have a few ideas of how we could have started a phase 3 or vaccine in March instead of July. This means we could have had an mRNA vaccine approved by July. If we could have started a 30,000 phase 3 study in March. It would have required investment against maybe 10 pathogens. I would say maybe $20 million per virus. That's nothing at the global scale, nothing. A lot of work can be done, preclinical. One of the reasons we moved so fast, we took 2 days to design the vaccine on the computer. Why? Because we had worked on MERS, another coronavirus, with Dr. Fauci's team for 2 years, looked at a lot of proteins, a lot of animal models. We knew out of the gates that our best chance of the corona with our technology was the spike S protein. And we just went with it. So I think there's a lot of things we can do. Think about how much governments spend on keeping nuclear weapons that they don't intend to use. And the order of magnitude of what we're talking to just make sure we protect ourselves. We protect each other. So I think in infectious disease, a huge amount of work should be done. I think, as you said, across a lot of disease that kills millions and millions of people every year, there's a lot of things we can do. I think the whole theme of eating healthy needs to be much higher on the agenda. As we know, there's so much comorbidity because of people not being healthy, because of their lifestyle, because of what they eat. This is another thing that we should do more of. And the other big one, of course, is the environment, which is think about where the planet is heading. Think about, yesterday I had the chance to participate in UNICEF's annual gala. And when you look at a lot of those videos, you say, look at the misery around the world that this virus has created, but think about the misery that's happening around the world because of the environment. And we are not, as a society, driven enough about the environment. There's a lot of good things happening around the world, a lot of good things. A lot of companies, like I know AstraZeneca, very committed to do a lot of things, but we're not moving fast enough. And when this one is going to go impacting the world, like this pandemic is impacting the world, it's going to be bad. And we won't have a vaccine to stop the environment in a year. That won't happen that time.
Stefan, a big thanks to you. Thanks also to Paul, Mene, Henrietta, from Børge and I here in Geneva, and to everyone who's joined us. Thank you for being with us. And thanks for sharing all of your insights and experiences with us this afternoon at the GRD. Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye from all of us here in Geneva.
Bye.
Bye.
Stay healthy, everybody.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.